I still remember the sound before the silence. It was laughter sharp, sudden, and aimed like an arrow cutting through the soft music and clinking glasses. I sat there, my hands folded neatly in my lap, as if good posture could shield me from the sting. At my brother Daniel's wedding, the bride had just called me a pathetic single mom, and the whole room found it hilarious. Then my own mother, Linda, leaned into her champagne glass and added like a clearance item with a damaged label. That's when the laughter swelled, and something inside me began to splinter. It's strange how in a single moment you can feel every eye in the room without looking up. I kept my gaze fixed on the gold-rimmed plate in front of me, tracing the pattern with my eyes, while my heart pounded like a drum. I told myself to stay still, to keep smiling, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But when I glanced to my right, I saw my 9-year-old son Ethan staring up at me, his small hands twisting a napkin, his eyes filled with questions he didn't yet know how to ask. He leaned closer, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Mom, why are they laughing at you?" My chest tightened. There are questions a parent never wants to answer, truths you hope to shield your child from just a little longer. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. How could I tell him that sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who tear you down? How could I explain that the laughter wasn't about a joke? It was about me, about the space I take up, about the life I've lived. I wanted to grab his hand, stand up and leave, just disappear into the night before my humiliation could deepen. But before I could push my chair back, Ethan did something I didn't expect. He stood up. No hesitation, no looking to me for permission. Just stood. His little frame straightened, his chin lifted, and he began walking toward the stage. At first I thought maybe he was confused, going to get more bread rolls or following the music. But then I saw his eyes steady and unblinking, fixed on the microphone at the front of the room. And my breath caught. The sound of their laughter stayed with me long after it faded. It wasn't the kind you hear at a shared joke or a joyful moment. No, this was sharper, like broken glass under bare feet. Sophie stood there in her perfect white gown, holding the mic as if she owned the entire room. Her smile didn't falter, but her words carried poison. Rachel's a perfect example of what happens when you peak in high school and never recover. My stomach knotted. It was cruel, calculated, and everyone knew it. Yet somehow that made it all the more acceptable for them to laugh. Then came my mother's voice, smooth but cutting, slipping into the moment like a blade. "She's like a clearance item with a damaged label," she said, and the crowd erupted again. I sat there, spine straight, a smile plastered on my face, as though I'd agreed to be the evening's entertainment. Inside, though, it felt like someone had poured ice water into my veins. In that instant, I was both a grown woman and a small child again, trying to figure out what I'd done to deserve being the punchline in my own family's story. It's funny how quickly humiliation can change the air around you. Before those words, I had been invisible at my table, politely nodding and making small talk. After them, I was center stage, without even moving every conversation nearby, slowing just enough to let the echo of those remarks sink in. I could see it in their glances, some pity, some amusement, and some relief, that at least tonight they weren't the target. It reminded me of high school cafeterias where social safety often meant laughing along, so you wouldn't be the next one singled out. What I've learned painfully is that people will often disguise cruelty as humor when it's aimed at someone they've already decided is less than. They convince themselves it's harmless, that the target should lighten up. But words have weight. They stay. They can make you question your worth in a room full of people who barely know you. And sometimes the sting isn't just in what's said, it's in who says it. Your mother's voice can carry twice the weight of a stranger's, because it's supposed to be the voice that protects you. That night, mine didn't. Still, I sat there smiling through clenched teeth, aware that Ethan was watching me. I couldn't crumble, not in front of him. I've always told him that dignity is something no one can take unless you hand it over. In that moment, I was holding on for dear life, even though my hands felt like they were slipping. I didn't know then that my son was about to show me a different kind of dignity, one that didn't come from enduring quietly, but from standing up and speaking the truth. And that moment was already walking toward me. The morning of Daniel's wedding felt heavier than it should have. I stood in front of my mirror, tugging at the zipper of a navy blue dress I'd found on a clearance rack 2 weeks earlier. It was a little too snug, the fabric pulling slightly at the seams when I moved. but it was the nicest thing I owned. I told myself it looked formal enough, even if it wasn't perfect. That's the quiet dance single moms know well, making the most of what you have while pretending it's exactly what you wanted in the first place. Ethan wandered into my room still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. He froze when he saw me, and a big grin spread across his face. "You look like a movie star," he said, with absolute conviction. I laughed, brushing back his messy hair. "Thanks, buddy," I replied, even though I didn't feel like one. Children have a way of seeing beauty you can't find in the mirror. To him, the dress wasn't cheap, and I wasn't self-conscious. I was just his mom, and that was enough to make me special in his eyes. We left the apartment later that morning, the city still waking up. The drive to the venue was quiet at first, just the hum of the engine and the occasional shuffle of Ethan adjusting his tie. Then he asked, "Do you think Uncle Daniel is nervous?" I smiled and said, "Probably. Weddings can be scary." What I didn't add was the truth in my chest that family gatherings could be scarier. There's a certain anxiety that builds when you know you'll be walking into a room full of people who see you through the lens of your past, not who you are now. It's a strange reality. You can work hard, raise a kind child, keep a roof over your head, and still be defined by what you don't have: a husband, a perfect career, the right image. I've learned that people love a neat success story, and anything messier than that makes them uncomfortable, so they fill the gaps with their own assumptions. That's why I'd already braced myself for the little digs and loaded compliments. A small lesson I've carried with me is this: sometimes the armor you wear isn't for the strangers in the room, it's for the people who think they know you best. By the time we arrived, I had smoothed my dress, retouched my lipstick, and plastered on a smile I hoped would last the night. The venue was breathtaking: white roses, candlelight, the faint sound of a violin drifting through the air. Ethan looked around in awe, adjusting his little bow tie like he belonged there. I wanted to believe we both did. But as I stepped inside and caught the first calculating glance from Sophie's bridesmaids, I felt that familiar weight settle back on my shoulders. I didn't know it yet, but this day was about to test every bit of composure I had left. There was a time when Daniel and I were inseparable. Being 5 years older meant I naturally stepped into a protective role. When our dad left, it wasn't something we talked about, it was just the unspoken truth shaping every day of our lives. I walked him to school, helped him with homework, and even learned how to cook spaghetti, because it was the only thing he'd eat without complaint. We weren't just siblings, we were each other's safety net. In those years, it felt like the world could be falling apart, but as long as we had each other, we'd be fine. I still remember the summer he broke his arm falling off his bike. Mom was too busy with work, so it was me sitting in the ER, holding his good hand, telling him bad jokes to make him laugh. That was Daniel, tough until the moment pain hit, then quietly leaning on me without having to ask. I never resented it. If anything, I cherished the fact that he trusted me to be there. He was my little brother, and I thought nothing could change the closeness we had built through years of shared struggle. But time has a way of quietly rearranging relationships. When Daniel met Sophie, the shift was subtle at first: missed calls, shorter conversations, rescheduled plans. I told myself it was normal, that relationships take time and energy. Still, there were moments that stung. Like the Christmas he didn't come over because Sophie wasn't feeling festive. Or the time he skipped Ethan's birthday party, sending a text instead of showing up. The excuses piled up, and before I knew it, we were talking more about weather than about life. I think the hardest part wasn't losing his time, it was feeling like I was losing my place in his life. Sophie had a way of occupying space, of making it clear who mattered most in the room. And Daniel seemed happy to let her. I learned an important truth. Then relationships rarely collapse overnight. More often they erode bit by bit until one day you wake up and realize the bridge between you is barely holding. That's when you have to decide whether to keep patching it or let it fall. Still, despite the growing distance, I held onto the good memories. Maybe I was stubborn, or maybe I just believed that the brother who used to chase fireflies with me in the backyard was still in there somewhere. That belief kept me from giving up entirely. Walking into his wedding that day, I carried it with me like a fragile glass, hoping it wouldn't shatter completely. I didn't know that the events of the evening would crack it wide open, forcing both of us to see what had been lost and what might still be saved. The first time I met Sophie, she walked into my apartment like she'd been invited to judge it. Perfect hair, perfect nails, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was the kind of woman you notice immediately, not because she demands attention, but because everything about her feels curated. Her perfume lingered long after she left, the sort that belongs in glossy magazines. I remember thinking Daniel's smitten, and he was. But underneath that flawless surface, there was something else, a quiet, assessing gaze, like she was filing me away under a category she didn't want to revisit. It wasn't that she was openly rude, at least not in ways people could call out. She was polite, complimentary even, but in that tone that made her words feel like double-edged swords. "It's so inspiring that you're raising Ethan on your own," she said, once her head tilted just enough to make it sound like I'd been left broken and barely holding on. Or, "You must be so busy. How do you even find time for yourself?" It was never what she said, but how she said it, like she was setting me apart from everyone else in the room. Mom, of course, adored her from the start. Linda leaned in when Sophie spoke, laughing a little too loudly at her stories, even the dull ones. I could see the comparison playing out in real time: Sophie, the polished gem, and me, the rough stone. It's strange how parents sometimes embrace outsiders more warmly than their own children, as if the presence of someone better redeems their family in the eyes of others. I tried not to take it personally, but it's hard to ignore when the warmth you've longed for your whole life is suddenly given to someone else. Over time, I realized Sophie had a skill, a way of making herself look generous, while subtly undermining others. At family dinners, she'd compliment my cooking, then mention how she added a little twist to a similar recipe that Daniel loved. When I wore a dress she liked, she'd ask if it was vintage, as if that explained why it didn't match current trends. I learned that not all harm is loud or obvious. Sometimes it's dressed in silk and smiles, leaving you wondering if you imagined the sting. That's what makes it so effective. By the wedding day, I knew exactly what to expect. The polite digs, the artful glances, the unspoken reminder that I was out of place. But standing in that venue surrounded by flowers and candlelight, I still felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, Sophie would surprise me. I didn't know then that she was about to deliver her sharpest blow, yet one that would land in front of 100 witnesses and change the way I saw her, my brother, and even myself forever. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. The venue looked like it had been pulled from the pages of a bridal magazine. White roses draped over every archway, candlelight flickering against crystal glassware, the faint sound of a violin threading through the air. Guests floated from table to table, their laughter mingling with the scent of champagne. Ethan's eyes were wide as he took it all in his little bow tie, slightly crooked. I fixed it for him, telling him he looked like the man of the hour. In that moment, I wanted to believe we belonged there, even if a part of me knew better. As we found our seats, I noticed Sophie's friends clustered together near the head table. They had the same effortless polish. She did perfect hair, matching manicures, and expressions that slid from polite smiles to quiet whispers when they glanced my way. I'd seen that look before in high school hallways, the kind that wasn't overtly hostile, but still made you feel like you'd walked into a room wearing the wrong skin. It's the kind of social signal that says, "You're here, but you're not one of us." And you feel it whether they speak it aloud or not. Throughout the early part of the evening, I did what I've always done in uncomfortable spaces. I smiled, nodded, and kept my responses light. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny and asked questions I didn't really care about, just to keep conversations moving. Ethan sat beside me, his small hands folded over his napkin, listening quietly. He's always been observant, watching the way people treat one another, storing those moments away like puzzle pieces. Sometimes I wonder if he notices more than I do, and that thought both comforts and terrifies me. One thing I've learned is that social exclusion doesn't always come with slammed doors or raised voices. Sometimes it's in the pauses, the way someone's eyes slide past you, the way your presence doesn't ripple the air the way theirs does. It's easy to pretend it doesn't matter, to convince yourself you're imagining it. But the truth is, those moments add up. They can make you shrink a little inside, even as you sit up straighter on the outside. And it takes real effort to keep showing up when you know you're not truly welcomed. By the time the speeches began, I'd settled into a rhythm, telling myself I could get through the night without incident. But then Sophie took the microphone. Her voice was sweet at first, thanking family and friends for being there, sharing a few rehearsed jokes. And then, without warning, she turned the spotlight onto me. What came out of her mouth next was so sharp, so deliberate, that it froze the air in the room. And before I could even react, my mother's voice followed, sealing the moment with a laugh that would echo in my ears long after the night was over. Sophie's smile never wavered as she shifted her gaze toward me, microphone in hand. And of course, she began, we have Rachel here, Daniel's amazing sister and a true example of resilience, raising a child all on her own. It's really something. I mean, not everyone gets to peak in high school and then still show up like this. The laughter that followed wasn't explosive, but it was steady, like a wave pulling at my feet. I froze in place. I'd heard backhanded compliments before, but this one was different. It was crafted to land hard, right in front of everyone. Before I could even process it, my mother's voice joined in, smooth as honey but cutting as glass. She's like a clearance item with a damaged label, Linda said, raising her champagne as if to toast the remark. The laughter grew louder, now spilling across the room. I could feel it curling around me, wrapping tight until it was hard to breathe. In that moment, I wasn't a guest at my brother's wedding. I was the punchline. And somehow the people who were supposed to love me most had volunteered to lead the joke. The thing about public humiliation is that it burns twice, once from the actual words and again from the realization that people are watching to see how you'll respond. My instincts screamed at me to keep my face neutral, my back straight. Years of practice had taught me that showing pain only gives people more to feed on. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes, nodding slightly as if to say I can take it. Inside, though, my chest felt heavy and my hands curled into fists under the tablecloth. I've learned that cruelty is often disguised as humor, especially when aimed at someone who's already been labeled less than. The delivery is casual, the tone light, so that if you take offense, you seem too sensitive. It's a tactic that thrives in family gatherings where history is long and boundaries are blurry. I've been on the receiving end of it enough times to know these moments aren't accidents. They're choices. And each time it happens, you have to decide, will I swallow it down again or will I push back? That night I didn't get to choose. Because while I sat frozen, Ethan was watching. His small fingers twisted the edge of his napkin, his big brown eyes darting between me and the people laughing. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "Mom, why are they laughing at you?" That question was a mirror I didn't want to look into. I opened my mouth, but no answer came. My throat was tight, my mind scrambling. And before I could find the words, he made a decision of his own. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and began walking toward the stage. At first I thought Ethan was just heading toward the dessert table, or maybe chasing the sound of the music. But there was nothing playful in his steps. His small black shoes tapped steadily against the polished floor, each step louder in my ears than the chatter around us. People began to notice. Heads turned, voices lowered. I reached out halfway, whispering urgently, "Ethan, come back." But he didn't even glance my way. His shoulders were squared. His chin lifted, tiny gestures that carried the weight of someone much older than 9. I've seen that look on his face before, usually when he's defending a friend on the playground or correcting a teacher who got a fact wrong. It's the look of quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't need volume to be heard. As a parent, you hope your child learns to stand up for what's right. You just never imagine they'll have to do it for you. Watching him walk toward the stage, I felt a rush of pride tangled tightly with fear. I didn't know what he would say, only that he was going to say something. The room seemed to still as Ethan climbed the 2 steps onto the stage. The DJ leaned down, clearly unsure how to handle it. "Hey buddy, this isn't..." But then Daniel raised his hand and said, "Let him speak." My heart lurched. Now everyone's eyes were on him. He was so small against the backdrop of towering white roses and golden light. But in that moment he looked steady, grounded, like the truth itself had given him roots. Sophie turned slowly, her smile tightening her fingers, curling slightly around the edge of the table. Moments like these teach you how quickly the balance in a room can shift. 1 second, everyone's riding the wave of a shared joke. The next, they're holding their breath, waiting for something they can't quite predict. It reminded me of when Ethan was 5 and spoke up at a parent-teacher meeting about how the class pet wasn't being fed enough. No one expected it then either, but he was right. That's the thing about truth, it doesn't care about timing or politeness. When it's ready to be spoken, it finds a way out. Ethan gripped the microphone stand with both hands, his voice small but steady. "I know something about the bride," he said, and a ripple went through the crowd. Sophie tilted her head, her tone syrupy sweet. but with a faint crack underneath. "What's that, sweetheart?" she asked. He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he looked at me just for a second as if to say, "You've always told me to be honest. I'm just doing that now." And in that silent exchange, I understood whatever happened next. This moment wasn't mine to control anymore. Ethan cleared his throat, the microphone amplifying the small sound until it seemed to fill the room. Before the wedding, he began, "I was looking for the bathroom." His voice was calm, each word deliberate. I walked past a room and heard Sophie talking to one of her friends. She said she didn't really want to marry Uncle Daniel. She said she just needed someone stable, who'd give her a house and wouldn't ask questions when she stayed out late. The air tightened around us. Gasps slipped through the crowd like cracks in ice, sharp and impossible to ignore. Sophie's face froze for a fraction of a second, then softened into an incredulous smile. "That's not true," she said quickly, glancing around as if to rally support. But no one spoke. I could see Daniel staring at her, his brow furrowed, caught between disbelief and the need to know more. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his grip on the microphone and went on. "She also said that once they were married, she'd make sure people like my mom never showed up again." My breath caught. This wasn't just about him defending me, it was about him refusing to let someone erase me. The room had shifted completely now. Guests leaned forward in their chairs, some whispering, others frozen in silence. I thought about how rare it is for children to speak truth in rooms full of adults, especially when that truth challenges the people in power. Most kids learn quickly to keep quiet to avoid conflict. But Ethan wasn't wired that way. Maybe it was because I'd raised him to believe honesty was worth the risk. Maybe it was because he'd seen enough to know silence can do more harm than speaking up. Either way, he wasn't backing down. Then from the back of the room, a voice rang out. I heard her too. It was Maya, one of Daniel's old friends who had drifted away when Sophie entered the picture. She stood, hands clenched at her sides. I went into the bridal suite to drop off her shoes. She didn't see me, but she said exactly what Ethan just said, word for word. Sophie's color drained as the crowd reacted. In that instant, the story shifted from a child's accusation to a confirmed betrayal. The weight of it landed on every person in the room, heavy and undeniable. It struck me then how truth once spoken and confirmed changes the rules of the room. People can deny an accusation, but it's much harder to deny two witnesses. It reminded me of times in my own life when I wished anyone would stand beside me and say I saw it too. That's the lesson Ethan was showing me. Truth grows stronger when shared. And as Daniel rose slowly from his chair, eyes locked on Sophie, I knew we were about to see just how much that truth would change everything. Daniel stood slowly, like someone waking from a dream they weren't ready to admit was real. His eyes stayed fixed on Sophie, but there was something different in them now, a sharpness that hadn't been there moments before. You said that his voice was quiet, but it carried. Sophie blinked quickly, trying to recover. Daniel, he's a child. Are you seriously taking his word over mine? Her tone wavered between disbelief and desperation. She looked around, searching for allies in the room, but the silence told her everything. No one was stepping in. The laughter from earlier had long since vanished. Sophie tried again, this time louder. This is ridiculous. I was joking with my friends every bride vents before a wedding. He misunderstood. But Daniel didn't move. He just shook his head slowly, as if he was replaying years of conversations and seeing them differently. I've asked you so many times if you loved me, he said, his voice cracking, and you always said yes. But my nephew didn't just make that up. It was in that moment I saw the Daniel I remembered, someone who valued honesty over appearances, even if it hurt. It's strange how betrayal can rearrange the entire map of a relationship in seconds. One minute you think you know where you stand. The next you're standing on unfamiliar ground. I'd been there before, watching trust dissolve so fast it left me dizzy. The difference was this time I wasn't the one losing it. I saw Daniel's hands clench at his sides, the muscles in his jaw tightening. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just the quiet devastation of realizing the person you built your future with might never have been who you thought. Sophie's face hardened, the sweetness gone now. She muttered something under her breath, then turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor until the sound faded completely. For a moment the room was still. Then someone began to clap. It wasn't loud or rushed, just a steady, deliberate rhythm. Others joined in, and soon the room was filled with applause. But this wasn't for Sophie or even Daniel. It was for Ethan for speaking the truth when no one else would. I pressed my hand to my mouth, overwhelmed by the sight of strangers honoring my son's courage. Daniel walked over to me, his steps unsteady but purposeful. Without a word, he pulled me into a hug, the kind we hadn't shared in years. "I'm sorry," he whispered into my shoulder, "for all of it." I closed my eyes, letting the years of distance dissolve just a little. In that moment, I realized something. Sometimes the truth doesn't just break things apart. Sometimes it gives you a chance to rebuild. As we pulled apart, I knew the night wasn't over yet, but it had already changed everything. Later that night, the parking lot was almost empty. Ethan sat in the back seat, his bow tie undone, his curls damp from the long evening. I glanced at him in the mirror. "You okay, buddy?" He nodded. "Yeah, are you?" That question hit deeper than any insult could. "I think I am," I said, and for once, I meant it. In one night, I had been humiliated, defended, and reminded of my worth. Not by an apology from my mother, not by the approval of a crowd, but by the courage of a 9-year-old who refused to let wrong go unchecked. In the days that followed, Daniel postponed the honeymoon. We talked not about the wedding, but about the years we'd lost. I could feel something rebuilding slowly, but with intention. Linda sent a short text. "Hope you understand things got out of hand." I didn't reply. For the first time, I didn't need her validation. That's the real gain no one tells you about: learning that the people who define you aren't always the ones you share blood with. Sometimes they're the ones you've raised, nurtured, and taught to stand tall, even in rooms where the air is heavy with judgment. Looking back, I see the whole night as a kind of unveiling. The laughter showed me who was willing to tear me down. The silence revealed who wouldn't stand up. And the truth spoken bravely by a boy in a clip-on tie proved that integrity can turn the tide, even when you think the current is against you. That's the lesson I'll carry forward: your voice matters, and so does the voice you teach someone else to use. Ethan reminded me that the values we plant in our children can take root when it matters most. If this story moved you, made you think of your own moments of truth, I'd love to hear them. Drop a comment below and tell me, when was the last time you stood up for someone, or someone stood up for you? Like this video if you believe courage should always be celebrated, no matter where it comes from. Share it with someone who might need the reminder that their worth isn't defined by anyone else's opinion. And if you want more stories that are real, raw, and rooted in hope, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss what's next. Thank you for listening, for being here, and for believing that kindness and truth still have a place in this world.